All right, welcome back to Design for Impact. Today we're going to be talking about scaling, which is a pretty important topic, I think, when you're kind of talking about complex systems and making a difference in the world, because obviously scale is very important if you want to kind of make a dent in the universe. So just to recap, last week we spoke about experimentation and prototyping. So how do we test your ideas? And we said some of the principles were around, asking what if questions, relying on data rather than opinions, replicating your experiments when you're not sure of the result, and being able to kind of, use experimentation or prototyping as a cheap way of testing multiple options, kind of seeing what sticks and what doesn't. And then the two most important principles were around learning and pivoting. So you need to kind of action your learning. It's not just about, gaining knowledge. It's about actually being able to use that knowledge in a tangible way. And then the last one is staying ethical. So, what are the things that you need to keep in mind when you're testing your ideas with people in order to kind of, be ethical. What do people think of what we mean by scale and impact? What do you think when you kind of hear those types of words?
So by scaling, I mean the idea, how can we augment it and how can we grow that idea? And the impact is, if we grow that idea, how would it impact other people? How would it influence other people to adopt it and so on?
I think scale, I think in the tech or maybe the lean sense of um, can what we're building support more and more people or more and more users without breaking or without having to be redesigned.
Yeah.
And impact is pretty subjective.
Yeah.
But it's really understanding what it's. I guess it's understanding what is going to provide value.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Very nice. Cool. Pia, do you have any thoughts as well?
No, I agree pretty much with Bhushan said. So I thought that was
Awesome.
pretty close to, yeah.
Awesome. So there's a few different ways of thinking about impact, right? The first one is like, what human beings or what people are we impacting? Like, is it a specific community? Is it a specific group of people who are going through a similar experience, like say unemployment, or kind of, or is it like an individual person? Or I mean, usually it's not one person that you're impacting. Usually it's a group of people. Like it might be a community, even if it's not like a community that knows each other. But it might be like a group of people with with some similarities. The other type of impact is organizations, right? So if you're working for, like, say, a large business or an industry like mining, or like there was one project I was working on that was trying to improve the health and safety of people working in construction, right? So you're impacting organizations in terms of like what organizations do, etc. But ultimately, you're also impacting people, right? Because you're impacting the people those organizations work for. So it's kind of like a bit kind of top down in a way. The other way to think about it is like, are we impacting people functionally, or are we making like a functional impact, right? Like, are we helping someone get a job? Versus like, or are we trying to create an impact in terms of like their emotions or their psychology, right? Like, are we helping people feel more confident about, finding a job? Does that make sense? And again, often it's not like, human beings aren't these like, they don't have split personalities. Usually when you impact their functional components, then you also impact, their emotions and their psychology and vice versa. And then the third way to kind of think about it is like, is our impact supposed to be, are we trying to have like deep impact, right? Are we kind of trying to change people's mindsets or attitudes or behavior? Or are we trying to have broad impact, right? In terms of like the number of people that we're impacting. How does that sound to people as kind of as a different way of framing impact or scale?
Yeah, very, very deep and very interesting, Abraham, because I think so far, I think when you look at UX, you only had emotions and behaviors and users in your mind.
Mm.
But I think this provides a good framework and methodology for us to work together. I think this also helps us to do to actually set a KPI
Yeah.
In so far as how deep have we gone or how broader have we moved into creating that impact.
Yeah, that's really interesting. It's kind of like what's the outcome and then what's the measurable kind of stuff that we can actually measure our progress on. That's cool, Bishan. Anyone else have any thoughts?
Yeah, no, this seems really concise. I use this deep broad as the way that I close out anytime that I'm delivering any sort of research or insights
Yeah.
for next steps in terms of we can continue to go deeper and focus, or we can now go broad with the same sort of plan but more people. But yeah, I love that. That's always like how we lead into where do we go next.
Yeah. That's cool as well. Talking about like next steps, like what are we trying to achieve with those next steps? So the reality is it's not that simple. It's not like, so binary, which I kind of referred to earlier. In reality, you'll probably have like all of them and they're all connected in some sort of way, but you have more of something and less of something else, right? Kind of a bit like, I don't know, a bit like cooking maybe. Like some recipes you'll have more salt, some recipes you'll have less salt, depends on the quantity and things like that. So, in another kind of in a typical project, you might have like more human impact and less organizational, or more emotional or psychological and less functional. So again, it's not like so black and white. Here's an example, right? I don't know if anyone's heard of this, but this is a company called DoNotPay, and it's basically a robot lawyer, right? So the types of things that they help you do is like fight parking fines or sue different companies, unethical practices. One of the cool features that I like is like using a virtual credit card for free trials, so you don't get charged after the free trial runs out. Canceling memberships and requesting refunds, right? So that's kind of one sort of way, or one case study that we'll use to kind of say, okay, what impact is this organization trying to have? Did anyone hear of this before? Any thoughts?
Nope.
Yeah, right.
No, I've never heard of it.
It's a cool company. I think it got started from London. It was just like one guy who didn't like something about parking fines, and he was like, but now it's kind of pretty.
Probably gonna have to have a lot more context to mostly functional, but I'm not gonna fit it in a little square.
Tell me what you're thinking.
So I think the objective is to be functional, right? And that it's solving a very simple tactile problem of providing information and means to a broad group of people. But there's definitely an emotional component, maybe a psychological component, where at least here in the States, there's having access to a free lawyer is a game changer. Where our justice system is wanting, and like I don't know that it's stand out emotional or psychological, but I can see the fallout of having that that sort of impact.
Yeah, it's kind of like having like like for a lack of a better term, like a hero, right? In terms of like someone who'll be there for you even if you can't afford it, or and I agree, like the psychological aspects, like parking fine might not be a big deal. I don't know what the parking fines are like in the States, but parking fines might not be a big deal, but it's like just having the psychological impact of having to deal with a parking fine would they would impact that as well. That's cool, Bushan, about being broader in some areas and then deeper in others.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think when you said that it deals with fines and it deals with other things, I think the level of complexity with each of these problems is very different. Like for instance, if you are dealing with parking fines versus if you're dealing with credit card payments. I think the level of impact also has to vary depending upon how complex the task is going to be to deal with it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. In terms of like
Right.
their implementation of the solution.
But I think it's more emotional versus functional or psychological, is because you are at an emotionally you're probably emotionally drained when you're thinking about how to deal with these complex problems. And so I would think that it's I think when you're using this app, you would most probably think about how do I deal with it versus is this app going to function for me.
Yeah.
I think your first reason to pick up the phone is to file or is to reach somebody out there who can help you out with.
Yeah.
So it's more emotional versus functional.
Who wrote human, like in human / organization, who wrote about lawyers and reducing clients for lawyers?
Me.
I think that's really good because it's like, I was thinking about that this morning, like, so I don't know if you guys have ever heard of like second order impacts, but in terms of like, people often think about like the first order impact, like if we do this, what's going to happen? You know, we'll help people with their parking fines, and then they forget about like, okay, what happens if we help people with their parking fines? And that's kind of like an example of second order impact, Pia, in terms of, you know, all of a sudden we've reduced clients for lawyers, and that might be a good thing. That's what, if, you know, lawyers don't want clients for like a recurring issue, but it might be a bad thing if that's, you know, a lawyer is just focused on parking fines.
Right.
And I think likewise with organizations, it might be like a good thing, right? That someone's holding them to account, but they might not like it very much because someone's holding them to account. So it's kind of like there's almost like two sides of the coin. It's always important to kind of think about like, how is this viewed from different perspectives and from people's different worldviews. So awesome work, Pia.
Thank you.
Awesome. Any more thoughts about this exercise in terms of thinking about like the impact of an organization or of an idea in different ways?
No, this makes sense.
I think this exercise could also help in hypothesizing about the impacts, right?
In terms of?
In terms of a new product idea.
Oh, yeah.
Let's say if we have to launch a new product, then we could be hypothesizing about what impact would it carry, or how is it going to be broader, deeper, so that it helps us to, like, for instance, if we have to develop an app, do we want to make it more emotionally viable or functional for the user, and so on.
Yeah,
Because
absolutely. Absolutely. Bishan, that's a
typically,
massive thing. Like, it's not just a retrospective thing, but it's also, it's like, if we, what's the impact of this idea on these different factors?
Yeah, because I typically find enterprise organization apps are typically more functional than emotional. The idea is not
absolutely.
not to
I
delight.
mean, some companies, like say, Hey, the company that was started by the founders of Basecamp, kind of talk a lot about the emotions of like being overwhelmed by email, even though it's like a functional product and it actually helps you manage your email, or it's supposed to anyway. They talk a lot about like, you know, everyone hates email and everyone struggles to keep on top of it, and kind of like they really emphasize the differences in emotion that you'll feel using something like Outlook versus Hey. So that's, yeah, it's an interesting sales strategy as well. Kind of, describing people's emotions back to them. So the next exercise we're going to talk about is what makes scaling difficult. So, you know, think about ideas that you've personally tried to scale, or products or services that you've tried to scale, or think about like, you know, like for example, other companies like say Google or Uber or Airbnb, or, you know, what are the challenges do you see them kind of facing when they scale? So this, you'll need to go back up in the Miro board to activity 1. All right. So this is kind of some answers that I was thinking about in terms of like, you know, with scaling, you kind of get more attention, right? So all of a sudden, or, you know, you have way more customers. So, you know, and an email of like, here's what's happening, you know, if that's not well understood, then you can get, you know, hundreds or thousands of replies. And all of a sudden, instead of, you know, dealing with 5 emails or 5 different customers, you're dealing with like 1,000 customers who misunderstood the email. The second thing is that it often costs, right? Like obviously you can, sometimes you can kind of grow without paying a lot of money, but often, whether it's extra advertising or you want to build more features or whatever it is, it actually costs money. And therefore you have to take money away from another part. The third one is that it shifts your focus, right? Instead of kind of like, instead of we're trying to, build as many features as possible, we actually need to kind of create a stable foundation, right? In terms of like, if we kind of, it's almost like worrying about like legacy systems and processes, right? You need to kind of build a solid foundation so that when you do get all those customers, you're not kind of fighting fires all around you. And then the last one is having the wrong people or the wrong team. It's not necessarily like a lot of companies, for example, change CEOs, right? From the person that starts the company to the person that's scaling or growing the company, because it requires like a different mindset. All right, so the next activity we're going to do is how would you go about scaling your idea? Okay, so there's kind of think about that learning experience as your idea. You can have a look at last week's in terms of like what are the prototypes that we were designing and people were building if you weren't here. And then as a group talk about these 4 questions, like how will you know your idea is ready to scale? Assuming that you kind of at that stage, your prototype, your idea is real, you're getting customers in. Like what are the things that you'd look for in terms of, okay, this is telling us that we're ready to kind of scale. The second one is like, what are the factors that you need to consider, right? Is it like, what features or what team or whatever it is, what organizational structure? The third one is like, what actions do we actually need to take to scale? And then the fourth one's how will you measure your progress? Kind of coming back to Bishan's thing, it's like, how will we measure that we're actually scaling in the way that we want to scale? And how will we measure, our impact? Any questions before I'll put you on a group for this so you can discuss together. Any questions?
No.
No.
Hello. How's it going?
We were trying to figure out what kind of scaling we would be doing.
All right.
I just go ahead.
I guess we decided on accessibility.
I was just throwing it out there. I'm open.
I think accessibility is, I think for this particular exercise, for people who are visually impaired, I mentioned in the last session as well that for these glasses to be fit for visually impaired people, they will need to be medically tested by a certain laboratory for them to be certified to be used for people with visual impairment. It's like it's a medical device, let's say. Now for this to be used by a certain class of people, you need that certification.
I think we're talking about accessibility strategy, not making the product for accessibility. So that the strategy I was talking about, where there's a high cost of entry of having to buy AR glasses, where we might be able to find content and functionality that would just work on a phone.
Mm-hmm.
The Coursera courses that could use the AR functionality in a phone just fine without the demands of the glasses. They're definitely being a smaller feature set in a phone application, but rather than pumping up manufacturing and content and features, this would be let's diet all of that, reduce all of that, and then just make this instead of having to buy a $300 or $400 pair of glasses, download an app and pay a subscription fee and pay the course fees, that kind of thing.
Okay, so Kyle, when you're talking about accessibility, it's like making it cheaper to purchase. Is that right? Yeah.
Yep. Market accessibility.
Okay, cool. So, all right. Okay. So if we were going to kind of scale, like make it cheaper to purchase, right? Or to have that experience, what things do you need to consider in terms of scaling that out? maybe maybe just 2 or 3 minutes kind of individual thinking time. Just jot down post-it notes in terms of like, what are the things that, how will we know it's ready to scale? And what do we need to consider when we are scaling?
So I think in one of the sessions, I said that these glasses, they really, when you come out with it, these glasses really need to be very, the glass itself, the material has to be very cheap. And when I say cheap, I don't mean third-rate quality. I mean cheaper for a person to make that first purchase. Because it's time now that all our things are now becoming wearables, right?
Yeah.
If you look at the Series 5, the Apple Watch, it has an LTE chip within it, so you can make calls from the phone itself. If you have your AirPods, then you can actually do a call on right from your watch. And I think in some years' time, your phone is now going to be well, I hate to say this, but it's going to be redundant, because then everything will be wearable technology.
Yeah.
But then how do we, like the first watch that came out, it had some very basic features. The Series 1 was waterproof. You couldn't make a call. It was thicker. The battery life was not very great.
Yeah.
And that's because they wanted people to get hooked onto it. They wanted to also see what kind of impact it has on people's lives, so that they can move on to the next iteration and then see what happens there.
Yeah. Okay. So we're talking about like, I guess there's two kind of ways to scale in terms of like accessibility, right? One is like cheapen the product, right? So make it cheaper to manufacture. And then the other one is like integrate more into it so that it replaces other things for people are willing to pay more for it. Does that make sense?
Right.
All right. So maybe you guys can jot that down. So what else do we have? We've got slow growth, heavy demands, cost of materials, cost of labor. What does a cheaper product, I think it's a good question. Like, what does a cheaper product do to our brand? Like, does that all of a sudden instead of being like a luxury product, it becomes like it's like a $10 thing. It probably doesn't do much for me. Yeah.
Yep. That's why Apple never goes on sale.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
No, I think the Apple strategy here is obviously they cannibalize their other products, but only to an extent. Like, they don't want you to, like, if I buy a watch, let's say, and if I have to dump my phone, the watch is not going to give me that same experience as an iPhone 12 will.
Yeah.
So I still will need my iPhone 12. So that you will find people who will still go for both. So I think in those terms, you will need to create a product that integrates maybe 8 out of 10 things. And then the 2 things you will probably need to think about it in the next iteration, so that people are able to come back to you and say, yes, we need those 2 things also now.
Yeah.
But for the initial launch, just to keep the prices down, the product quality down, we have to also scale down the production cost, scale down the development cost, and not have it fully loaded with features,
Yep. Yeah, that's true. Because like, you just want to test like the core value proposition. Like, is this something that people want? Not,
like an MVP, but it's a full product.
Yeah. Cool.
Actually, Series 1 is an MVP. It's not a full product, but it was marketed as a full product, so people hooked onto it. Series 6 is a full product.
Yeah.
Not the Series 1. The Series 1, of course, was an MVP.
Yeah. All right. Dawn and Pia, do you have any thoughts?
I feel like most of what I've been thinking has already been said. So Don, you can go ahead.
Cool.
Well, that's yeah. I was going to say the same thing. I was thinking that the first thing probably we would need to do is figure out who we want to market it for, which somebody put down, I need to understand my audience. So that would be the first thing I think would be deciding who we want to buy it
Yeah.
and figuring out how to make it appeal to that group, because it's not going to be accessible to everybody
Yeah.
if we're trying to maintain a certain prestige with the product.
Yeah.
So that's what I would think about.
Yeah, I would, yeah, that's really good. I would add as well that you kind of want to understand like the hierarchy of needs of people, right? So it's like like say for example, it was only this year that Apple put like, those widgets in the iPhone, right? And it's like, people really like that about Android, but for like, I didn't notice the difference. Sure, I use them now, but it wasn't like, say, as important to me as, moving from like an iPod to an iPhone, right? In terms of like all of a sudden being able to make calls. So it's like, you need to kind of prioritize those needs that people have and kind of use that to guide how you're scaling your product. Because you kind of get like almost like maximum impact for your dollar when you actually have a priority of needs that you're trying to meet. Awesome. What's CSAT? CSAT.
Yeah, customer satisfaction score. It's just one way of measuring
Yeah.
customer satisfaction
Uh-huh.
that I'm just using as a less of an indicator and more of a abbreviation.
Yeah, cool, awesome. What do people think about other ways to measure our progress? Like, how would you measure your progress if you're trying to scale your idea?
I guess like service uptime.
Yeah.
If you're going into feature expansion.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And yeah, when you're talking about it amplifies everything. A couple years ago, my company went into partnership with Walmart. And so we took over the US card for Walmart, which meant we immediately took on 10 million new customers all at once.
Yeah.
And there was a day that they flipped the switch. And there were a couple spots that we knew had issues from time to time in our infrastructure. As soon as you add 10 million customers to it, those issues exploded just like everything else.
Yeah.
So this will expose any of your weak spots too.
Yeah, absolutely. The same thing actually happened with the Australian government when like coronavirus hit and all of a sudden millions of people lost their jobs.
Sure.
There were specific features that like they knew they should have worked on ages ago, right? And then all of a sudden and it was like, roadblock after roadblock after roadblock. And then, once that kind of coronavirus hit and people lost jobs and millions of people needed the feature, it was like, okay, we have to do it. And they took, a week or two to do it when it was taking them like 3 months to not do much progress. So
exactly.
I guess the amplification like has both good and bad. Good because it gets you to fix like the problem that you have that's causing a lot of pain. Sure. And bad because, while you do that, a lot of people are feeling that pain.
Oh yeah.
Cool. Awesome. Any thoughts on this? So actually any other thoughts on how we can, I can think of a few ways that you'd measure progress of scale. Ushan, Pia, Dawn, there's really easy pickings. Okay, so one for example, one way, right, I would measure like scale or progress in terms of scale is like how many visitors or how many people are using the service or product, right? So that's like a really easy way of seeing, okay, last week we had 100, this week we have 120 people.
Yeah, I was thinking more in terms of service, how many people signed up.
Yeah.
And once you sign up, you also can track how many people are signing up using AR classes.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And it's almost like a funnel, right? You can measure progress and then optimize like different parts of the funnel. Like, people visiting the website, that might be one metric, and then people signing up and then people using the service and then, people referring, for example. So, and then you can measure kind of the number of people that you have across that funnel as a way to measure like your scale. And then say, for example, if you're getting a lot of people visiting, but you're not getting a lot of conversion into signups, then you can kind of try to make changes to that to kind of increase the conversion rate.
Right. Yeah.
All right, cool. Any thoughts about this activity before we move on?
No, brilliant. I think this really makes you think deeper as to what are the efforts that it will take to scale this product. What are the implications? Actually, that was the word I was looking for.
And I think you got like the team pulled out really important things in terms of like you can scale different things, and depending on that, you've got different like ways of scaling. Like we've chosen accessibility, right? But you could have scaled like how much money people are spending on this product, right? And then because we chose accessibility, there's like, okay, we could kind of make this product replace different other products and therefore increase the value, or we could decrease the cost to kind of make it more accessible. So I think it's really important to kind of think through that. Cool. Awesome. Let me share my screen. So the last thing, as usual, that we'll end with is just your feedback on today's session and what topics that we want to cover. I've been compiling topics in terms of like every topic basically that you share in terms of like what do we want to do next, or what do we want to cover next. I've been compiling those and kind of putting them in. Oh, adjacent possibilities. That's awesome.
Yeah, I've been diving into this a bit lately and just scrounging for anything I can find on it. And
I think the other big thing with, and I've seen this mostly with Australians, is they use a lot of strategic foresight. And I think there's an institute in Canberra, I forget the name, that really is a master of strategic foresight. So my question is, how much of that do you think is more relevant to what we are doing now?
I think it's pretty relevant. I think even if it's like, I think it's okay. So I guess in my mind, right, I've been reading this book called Polymath, and it's really, like, for me personally, it's really important for me to kind of understand different methods and kind of have that in like my toolkit, because then for any challenge I can, like, think of a method that applies to that thing, or a framework that applies to that thing, and be like, maybe service design isn't so helpful here, but maybe strategic foresight is. So for me, like, I'm personally really interested in like mental models and different approaches to problem solving, because then it helps me kind of, I guess, scale my impact in terms of like any challenge that comes up for the organization I'm working with, or the team that I'm working with, or the community, or whatever. Then I kind of have the toolkit, or at least I know someone who understands that approach. And I can kind of tackle it that way. So I would say it's actually, it's pretty relevant to systems thinking when you're thinking about like futuring and making change in systems and stuff.
Is there a possibility that we might learn that?
Yeah, absolutely. We can learn whatever you guys want.
I'm trying to associate that with change management and sort of diplomacy. I always say that the problems I'm working on, the customers I need to understand, like, I've got all the tools, I can figure that out, but it's my stakeholders that are always the biggest mess. Yeah. And so I'm really looking at adjacent possibles, and like, if we're talking about radical change, what can the culture actually accept? At the end of the day, what can the stakeholders accept? What can the public accept when we're rolling out? Because we can come up with really radical, forward-thinking solutions all day long, but I spent a lot of time sitting in front of rooms saying, this is how we're going to boil the ocean, and they just get terrified and shut down and go, why don't we go for the most milquetoast, risk-free solution? Yeah,
what if we change the button color? Would that solve the problem?
Change the what?
The button color. Would that solve the problem?
Exactly.
Like, no.
Right.
No.
Yes. Yeah. The system I'm working on now is all about changing the risk infrastructure at a financial institution in the U.S. And part of what I found is the biggest problem is that it's the usual product problem. It's that the engineers designed the interface, and it's going to everybody in the company and speaking of very hardcore legal or risk language and saying, define your business in these terms. And people are going, I'll just fill in what I have to so that I get through this exercise. Yeah. But we don't actually get insights from it. And so their answer is, we're going to build a new system that's easier to use. let's go get all of the experts in risk and legal to come in and tell us how to build that system.
Oh, that would be a good
Exactly.
system.
And
Yeah.
and I'm like, it's just going to be 2.0. That's all it is. It's getting a first coat of paint. These are the conversations I'm having. So adjacent possibles is where I'm trying to understand, like, everybody that I'm working with is like the experts in risk are the ones that have to define our risk infrastructure. And I'm trying to figure out where they are in the world of trying to say, like, why don't we tap the knowledge of the people that are out there in the field that are the indicators of risk, that are that can tell the story of their business, and then let us interpret that data as risk managers after the fact.
Yeah.
But we need to have some sort of translator in between, or something that, you know, amplifies two completely different intrinsic functions to the same platform.
Good luck with that challenge.
Yes. Thanks.
Cool. Any other thoughts, team? Dawn, Pia, Bashan?
No, Abraham, I'm good. Thank you.
Cool.
Me
Awesome.
too. Thanks.
Thanks for making the time again. It was good to see you and good to progress design for impact with you and kind of talk about impact and scale. I think that's like a really kind of important topic for me personally. Kind of always thinking about what can I do to make a bigger difference. Awesome. Thanks a lot for making the time. Hope you enjoyed the session. Please reach out if you have any questions. I'll create a portfolio review channel as well on Slack, Kyle, so that people get a chance to post their portfolios and get feedback. And I'll reach out to a couple of people after the session.
Cool. Thanks, everyone.
Sounds good.
Cool.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Bye.